the counties we represent think we have to be very smart in what we do to make sure we're not wasting precious taxpayer money because we are downstream. Okay, and you're absolutely right. The best way to keep pollution out of the bay is never letting getting it into any of the tributaries leading to the bay. That's sort of, everybody gets that. Here's what the Maryland experience has shown, that through legislation and regulation, changing people's activities and habits to keep pollution from ever getting into the water is a big undertaking. It's controversial, it's expensive, and it could produce results. But Maryland has been doing a lot of legislating and a lot of spending to keep pollution out of the waters. But the problem is we're at the point now where we have so much pollution built up above the dam, and the fact of the matter is very little is being done in the upper states, in the upstream states, compared to what Maryland's doing. And I will talk with anybody on this point. You cannot hold a candle. No other Bay state can hold a candle to the state of Maryland as far as commitment to helping the Bay in what was been spent and what's been regulated. Maryland's leading. But here's the problem. We're downstream. So we can only do so much before we say we're wasting money. State of Maryland has committed Maryland taxpayers to spending $3.7 billion regulating septic tanks. Now, septic tanks don't produce phosphorus, and septic tanks don't produce sediment. They produce some nitrogen, but very nominal amounts of nitrogen. EPA says in the Bay TMDL, oddly enough, functional septics do not pollute. Okay? And yet Maryland is committing $3.7 billion to regulate septics in Maryland. Now, let's talk about that amount of money and how much pollution you could keep out of the bay by dredging it out of Conowingo Pond, so at the next big storm, there's less to be thrown into the bay and scoured. When I said early on, it's simple. The coalition counties are thinking, if we're going to spend money to keep pollution out of the bay, we'd rather really focus on dredging Conowingo Pond, because there will be another storm. You know, Agnes was a 100-year storm, and it occurred in 1972. Exelon has requested a 46-year license. Look at the time span from 72, add a 46-year license that they might get in a few years. Could there be another Agnes? Tropical Storm Lee, was that a 50, 75? So we got to look at this license that they're going to get. There's going to be other storms that hit the Bay watershed. The coalition counties are concerned with doing nothing with respect to dredging. There's no trapping capacity. That means we're going to get it all. I mean, there is a concern among the coalition counties that there's a concerted effort to downplay the impacts of the Conowingo situation. And the reason why there might be a concerted effort to downplay is because when the average man on the street, the average taxpayer, realizes what's going on in the Upper Bay and what's going on at Conowingo, they start thinking, wait a minute, I was told we had to regulate septics to save the Bay. I was told the farmers need to do more to save the Bay, and that we got to. And people start to realize, wait a minute, maybe there are other sources of pollution that aren't being addressed that would help the Bay quicker and almost guaranteed. I mean, again, there's a lot of pollution sitting in that reservoir. If we do nothing, it will be scoured into the Bay. What happens when people look at Conowingo, just what you did, they realize there's a problem at Conowingo in the reservoir, but then they say, what about all the other stuff coming down? And that's exactly what the coalition wanted, which was people to start realizing how little Pennsylvania is doing. So the problem, when you look at the coalition and who they think, who they're really fighting, it's not as much, it's really our own state government. Because it's our state government that has decided to meet the Bay TMDL. They're going to tell the counties to do certain things and clean the Bay. So that was and the counties are saying, whoa, we can't do this without Pennsylvania. So here's where we've been trying to put pressure on. We have said to the state of Maryland, and we've actually said to EPA, Why aren't you all putting more pressure on Pennsylvania? There's a provision in the Clean Water Act that says if there's any Bay state that doesn't think another Bay state is doing their share, they can petition EPA. The coalition counties would say, why on earth hasn't the state of Maryland done that? Even before they committed Maryland taxpayers to spending $14 billion, wouldn't you say, let's make sure Pennsylvania is doing its share? Because we might waste a lot of money. So therein lies one of the big challenges and problems with the Bay cleanup agenda, which is why, again, we think bringing as much attention to the Conowingo problem does just that. It gets Marylanders to realize, oh my gosh, we are doing so much, and yet, look what's happening upstream. Very little. We know how much nitrogen the state of Maryland predicts will be kept out of the Bay by regulating septics. There's a number. They assign a number. They say, if we do all these things, we'll keep this many pounds of nitrogen out. By dredging a certain volume of sediment out of Conowingo Pond and keeping it from being scoured into the Bay, we will know by pound how much nitrogen we've kept out through that activity. And the cost of that activity of dredging per pound of removal will be much cheaper than what the state is saying we should spend to regulate septics to keep a certain pound of nitrogen out. If we could regain trapping capacity, the Bay literally gets some breathing room. Today, there's no breathing room. With the loss of trapping capacity, you're right, we're getting it all anyway, right? Every day, we're not. It used to be that when the dam had ample capacity, that the pond, 3 million tons of sediment hit the dam every year. 2 million settled out, and 1 million came over. We got it anyway. But 2 million a year settled out. That isn't happening anymore. So every day now, we're getting a lot more pollution than we used to because there's no trapping. You get the storm, you get the scour. So we think by adding trapping capacity, we at least give the Bay some breathing room, and we can get back to like restoring oysters in a meaningful way. We spend a lot of money dredging shipping channels in the Upper Bay to keep the Port of Baltimore viable. And nobody argues with the importance of keeping the Port of Baltimore viable. You know, got to do that. And we're talking about a lot of money, Dave, $1 billion in the last 10 years, dredging shipping channels, finding places to put the spoils, creating artificial islands. It belies common sense that it wouldn't be more efficient to do some dredging in the pond before all that's released like it is during a storm. Well, I mean, I think right now our coalition would say dredging and maintaining has to be on the table. Otherwise, we're going to waste a lot of money below the dam. You can't, I mean, how can you tell Hartford, Cecil, Kent, Baltimore County in the Upper Bay to do much when this can happen? I think the coalition counties think you have to do something to help the Bay have some breathing room, and it just has none anymore. So maybe the concern of others is, okay, you commit to dredging at the expense of what? Let's see. We haven't said do that, we're not going to do this. Let's do it all, but we got to do it in a certain order. Well, here's where the policy on WIPs. The WIPs are local plans that are subject to adaptation and refinement. They like any local plan, comprehensive plan, master water and sewer plan. I mean, local governments do a lot of planning. And one of the things that is an important foundational principle for the coalition is local plans matter. Right? If a county government has a local plan, then that should be respected. When the federal government and the state government start dictating, they should say, well, what does your local plan say? What do you have in mind? So take the WIPs. And we said this early on to the counties that were involved in the coalition. As far as we're concerned, the money you're spending to understand what's going on up at Conowingo, to intervene in the relicensing, that's part of your WIP plan. Because your WIP plan is, you're trying to improve the water quality of the Bay. Now, the state told us this is what we want you to focus on. But these local governments have autonomy. This is sort of an exercise in self-determination. These local elected officials say, fine, that's what you think is going to clean the Bay? We're not so sure. We'd rather also spend money on intervening in the relicensing. I mean, the intervention in the relicensing was the counties, these coalition counties, putting their money where their mouth is. It's proof that they weren't just saying, we don't like the WIPs, we're not doing anything. they said we're actually going to invest local resources to get involved in the relicensing and make a point that if we're going to spend all this money below the dam, these operators better do something about the accumulated sediment, or you may undermine what we're doing.